Oh, here we go. All right. Welcome to another session of Authentic Selling Live brought to you by Humantic. I'm Colin Mitchell, the Chief Evangelist over here for Humantic. And today I have Emily Shaw, who is a sales coach over at Lucian. Emily, do you want to give the folks tuning in today a little bit of background and a little bit about your story before we jump in here?
Sure. I've been in sales for my entire adult career. Love it. Obviously, I'm a psychology major, which probably helps me with some of this behavioral stuff and nerding out on it. When I found out that there was a role where I could combine both of those things on a daily basis, I found my dream job and I'm here.
And no looking back, huh?
Nope.
All right. So today's session, we're talking about perfecting the art of messaging. Obviously, based on Emily's background, I think you can tell now why we've brought Emily on today to talk about this. And we are going to just jump right in. We're going to break things down. We're going to answer some questions as well. And then we even are going to do a email rewrite based on a personality type. I don't know what type it's going to be. We're going to let Emily choose. So that will be a surprise towards the end. So we have some slides that we're going to share as well throughout the session. We have Aru on our team who's going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, drop them in there and we will save some time to the end to make sure that we get those. But if you're joining us, drop us in the chat, say hello, let us know who you are. And without further ado, we're just going to jump right in here and I'm going to share my screen. All right. So all right. So first, I want to jump in, Emily, and just for the folks that are maybe joining us that have never heard of DISC, aren't familiar, I'd love to just get your thoughts on how to break that down in the simplest terms for people to understand what it is and why sellers should know this and how powerful it can be for them.
Yeah. So DISC is a behavioral model, and what it teaches us about others is really how they prefer to go about things, specifically for our purposes today, communicating. But it also teaches us how they prefer to approach rules or with what speed they process things or prefer to process things. So it's really all about preference, which is what I love about Humantic AI, is that we're finally talking about what prospects actually prefer and how they prefer to learn and communicate, as opposed to everyone just sharing from the sales community, this is the best way to communicate with people. It's like, well, it might be the best way to communicate with some people, but we're all different and we all have different preferences. So that's how I really boil down DISC. It's not a personality assessment. I tell people all the time, based upon your combo pack of letters, I can't tell if you're a sociopath or a psychopath. Don't worry. And it's just, like I said, it's just really understanding how people prefer to communicate and take in information.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things, that is important for sellers to know is that we also have our own communication styles and
Yeah.
preferences, right? So it's only natural that we're typically going to default to our own preferences. And why is that a problem, Emily?
Because your preferences may not be the same as my preferences. When it comes to selling, and I'm pretty passionate about DISC in general, but when it comes to selling, it is definitely something that I hammer into like the brains of my clients, hopefully, because it is very hard to step out of your own box. And DISC is in large part about matching and mirroring. So if you are not cognizant of how you show up to someone who's not in your box or your predominant two boxes, you could not only be missing the mark on communication, but slightly offending them or irritating them, which is never what we want to be doing from a sales perspective.
Can you give me like a real example? Like, let's say, I'm a D type and I'm dealing with a type that I'm maybe a little bit less compatible with. What can go wrong?
So specifically if we were polar opposites, and I know we've talked about a DS combo before, but um, that is a sticky point possibly for that S, because if I as an S am using language like sort of, maybe, kind of, S's tend to use language that's a little more non-committal. Well, a dominant person is so transparent and so direct that they actually perceive that as you are keeping something from them or hiding something from them. It's not just a simple way of speaking to them. It's like, well, why can't you say definitively that it is? It's like, yes, could. It's just not how they prefer to say it. They don't want to be super direct and make you uncomfortable.
Right. That's a great example. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually get into the different types and just kind of dig into, what sort of the preferences and styles are with those particular people. And so the first type that we're going to go into is a D type, right? So D types, avoid small talk when pleasantries with these people. If you are a person that enjoys that stuff, this might be really hard for you, but why is it a bad idea with a D type, Emily?
They're purely thinking about how they can make the conversation most efficient, what's in it for them, and neither small talk nor pleasantries hit those markers. So they can start to feel like we're wasting time, and we're not getting down to the point quickly enough. So it's a distraction.
Yeah, and this is a tough one because so much sales training out there talks about, building rapport, and the problem is you got to build rapport in different ways with different people. And I think a lot of times people default to this small talk and pleasantries way of trying to build rapport.
Absolutely. Yes. Um, People, the rule I think that people state to me a lot is people buy from people they like, and I always craft it a little bit differently. Like, people buy from people who are like them. Those tend to be the people that we walk away from like, man, I don't know what it is about that person, but I just really like them. Yeah,
Yeah, and I
spot
think
on.
I think sellers can relate to that, right? There's just prospects that you feel like, let's say you know nothing about disc at all, but you've probably had an experience at some time where there's a buyer you just felt like you meshed with, and then you've probably on the other side had experiences where you felt buyers you're like, I don't know what it is, but we just aren't jiving.
Yeah, feels like a fight the whole time. No one's being rude, but it's just very challenging to get through the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And so D types are very goal oriented people. So how would you craft, messaging to a D type? How would you engage with a D type? What, knowing D types well, because you're a DI type yourself, what matters most to them when engaging in a sales process?
Well, that's a loaded question. There are a lot of things that matter to them, specifically goal oriented. We really need to be sure that we are communicating what's in it for them. So the question that these are most known for asking is like, well, what is it? What does it do? What It's just like the right down to the point. And from a goal orientation standpoint, they're always looking toward the future. So I train everybody that we should be setting expectations for everyone, but particularly these need a clear representation of what's coming next, why we are meeting. Everything needs to have specifically what the goal is for every interaction, or you'll lose them.
Yeah. And like it says here, really tying what it is that you do to those goals, because you don't want a D type to think that you're wasting their time.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say the other thing about goals too is, I hear sellers do this from time to time, to be very careful with a D not to impart what you think their goals should be
Mm,
in messaging and in communicating with them. I feel like I can say this without anybody getting mad at me because my score is like 70 D, 30 I. So we're control freaks. Dominant people just really like to be in control. And when you are telling them what they should be looking for, what should be important to them, they start to feel like A, they're losing control, and B, like you're attempting to take advantage of them, which is a big red flag for dominance.
yeah. Like I think a great example here is, if you're going into a prospect that's currently using a competitor, right? a lot of times the default for sellers is to talk about how they're better than that competitor. Well, ultimately, what you're doing with that line of communication is telling that person, and let's assume that they're a D type, that the decision that they made for that solution was a bad decision. So, how is that going to go over?
Yeah. I think it depends on how much pain they're in, and I say often too, and you may hold this to be true as well. But there's a spectrum, right? There, just like with I think some other models like Enneagram, there's a healthy spectrum and a spectrum of non-healthy, or maybe in a mode of stress. So in a mode of stress, if you tell a D that they're doing something incorrectly, or that they've made a bad decision, or really that they're failing, that's the biggest thing that they're hearing. Yeah, they don't have a lot of empathy for you. They're not worried about how the next few words out of their mouth make you feel. But a D type that is not in a high level of stress can flip on a dime. If you can show them what's in it for them, why it's better, let them feel like it's their own idea, then they can totally abandon what they did before, admit, yep, nope, that's not working for me. I did that incorrectly. Now I'm in your camp and I'm fully bought in over here. So I think
Yeah.
there is some nuance to knowing where you are.
All right. Well, we better move on to the other types here. I think folks are going to be like thinking we're a little too biased, spending way too much time on the D
Why
type.
would they think that? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, we could probably just sit here for the entire time talking about the D type, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to move on to the I type. Now, I type, I think a big trap is you never want them to feel like you're being transactional. And Emily, tell me why. Why is that with the I type that is a huge trap?
yeah, because they're all about authentic relationships. If they sense that you are being inauthentic and they can't connect with you, they're out.
Yeah. And so you'll see that there's some key differences here, right? Between like a D type and an I type, where, you know, how you communicate and the values of an I type are going to be very different. So how you frame things up will be very different with an I type based on the fact that, you know, relationships, authentic relationships, this is authentic selling live. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That authentic relationships matter a lot to I types. So what is an approach that would work better with an I type versus a D type?
Talking about yourself, and allowing the I to talk about themselves. Sometimes I hear that people think, oh, I's just want to talk about themselves and share about how cool they are and one up you all the time. That is not the goal of what they are doing. It's a tactic in, if they share with you, you will share with them, and then you'll be best friends. But if I'll go first, then you'll follow me, and we'll learn about one another. So being willing to explore similarities you have, values that you hold, is definitely something that an I would appreciate, and a D would think, why are we talking about this? What's the point of this conversation?
Mm. Yeah, and you'll see the big differences here, right? With the D and the I is small talk is recommended, right? And that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about. So knowing, you know, these types of, you know, knowing these people, knowing what their types are, you know, there's some vast differences of how you would approach, you know, messaging and communicating or running a sales call. You know, anywhere from your outreach messaging is going to look different, you know, all the way through just how you develop that relationship throughout the buyer journey.
Yeah. And while D's are really focused on control and making the decisions, I's are really game for collaboration, and they like to create ideas and share those ideas and hear ideas from someone else, and it feels like a very productive conversation for them. If you do that with an I or with a D, they may feel like you're not listening to them, and they really hate repeating themselves. So that would be a bad trap to fall into.
Yeah. And so let's move on to the, you know, and what's interesting is like, even if we just think about yourself, right? Where you said 70% D, 30% I, right? Which is an interesting mix because there's some key differences there. You know, how do you approach somebody that's maybe a, you know, more not necessarily totally heavy D or I, but, you know, kind of in between, or have, high scores in both quadrants?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with being able to pick up on their cues and sort of follow their lead a bit. Where I see sellers making mistakes is trying to overemphasize their own personality. And when they're focused so much on themselves and what am I saying and how am I coming across, it's very challenging to focus on your prospect on the other side. So, really sitting with intention and listening for their cues and letting them drive which way the conversation is going to go would be my biggest recommendation.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up because what are some cues that you could pick up, from a D or an I type that would give you a good indicator of maybe which quadrant they are, maybe more in or score higher in?
Yeah. So I really believe, like I said earlier, in setting expectations at the top of a conversation. You're in front of a dominant person when it's 3 seconds in, you haven't taken a breath yet, and they do the, all right, here's what I want to talk about today. Okay, I got it. I'm ready to go. And I may say something like, how was your weekend? And they'll ask you about experiences. We're going to get into S in a little bit. And sometimes there's confusion between I and S and being able to discern between the two of them. And S is not going to want to share about themselves or tell stories about themselves at all. They would rather the focus be entirely on you. I's are asking that so that you will then ask them next. And half the time, you don't have to. You'll get halfway through your story, and an I will say, oh my gosh, I've been there, I've done that. Here's what happened to me. So the more you start paying attention, the more it becomes very obvious. But those are some two that you could look for in the first just minute of conversation.
Yeah, I love that. And it's important to take a mental note of that and remember when you're crafting your emails or follow-ups or throughout the buyer's journey or any way time that you're going to be communicating, whether that's written or sending them a video or in an actual Zoom call or in person or whatever, being able to remember those things, those cues that you picked up on in order to craft the way that you communicate or write messages to these particular people. All right.
Absolutely.
So next, we're going to go to the S type. And before we jump into the S type, we just want to reach out to the audience and see if anybody has any questions about anything that we've covered this far. I know that we'll save some time towards the end, but also anybody who's maybe hanging out with us at the moment that has any questions, go ahead and drop those in the chat. All right. So we've got a question here. Do you have more template emails for prospecting for different disc? Aru, do we have any resources like that we have available? Maybe you can drop a note in the chat and answer that. Emily, I don't know, maybe you guys have some resources over at Lucian that we could share with people who joined us today as well.
I will poke around for those specifically. We have so many resources that I'm hesitant to say yes, absolutely, because we have thousands. That means there's a good chance, but I'm going to hold that over promising and under delivering move.
Yeah, anybody who registered for the event will put something together with some resources from Humantic as well as maybe Lucian as well. I think we're in the same boat where we have a vast amount of resources, so it's hard to remember what we have and what we don't. But if we don't have it, maybe it means we need to create it. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Drop them in the chat before we move on to breaking down the S type, and we can get those answered. All right, we got another question here. Would love to know more difference between S and I type. Often get confused there. Yeah. All right. So do you want to take that, Emily?
Yeah.
So you
absolutely.
brought it up. So you said
Yeah, I
there's
did.
some things that often get people confused. What are some things that can confuse people about knowing, hey, is this an S type or I type?
Yeah, I's and S's are both very people focused. So it can be challenging to discern the difference between them. And they, what I find the most is that we struggle to discern the difference between the two that we are not. So I hear a lot of D's and I's like, I can never remember the difference between S's and C's, and D's and C's. I can never remember the difference between S's and I's. So those that are least like you can be most challenging to discern the difference between. But like I said earlier, and I will absolutely talk about themselves at some point. They just can't help it. And S will definitively try at all costs to not talk about themselves. So there's one. Yes, I's are people focused. They're more focused on being accepted by people and their relationship that they have with people. S's are more focused on people being okay and not letting anyone down, sort of preserving the other person. So, and it sounds bad to say, but it's a little bit like I's are focused on preserving themselves and S's are focused on preserving others. I don't mean in general and in life. I just mean in communication and in that conversation.
Yeah, that's an important point to make here. We've got some additional questions in, or if you want to put those up on the screen, we can tackle those. But thanks for breaking that down.
Yeah.
Um,
One more
and
thing,
then,
I'm sorry to
yeah.
interrupt you. There is one more thing that would make it a lot easier. I think Shivang maybe was his name. It's not on the screen anymore. Um, the I is definitely like an energizer bunny, right? In
Mm,
communication, they're most demonstrative, they're most emotional, not from a place of not being able to control their emotions, but from a place of being very easily able to read their emotions. There's never, I have a 11-year-old daughter. She's the epitome of high I. No one in the house is ever confused about how she feels at any given moment, ever. It's the same thing with
oh,
high I's. However, high S's are very even keel, and it can actually be hard to determine how they are feeling. I tend to think that this is the superhero quadrant because I am married to a very high S. But I can tell you that there are many times during the week, like I say something like, "Are you okay?" And just his reaction is, "Yeah, why?" Like, well,
mm,
sometimes it's hard to tell because it all sometimes looks the same. We're always so cool, calm, and collected. So that's another way to discern between I and S.
I have an I type 6-year-old girl in my household, so I know what that's like.
It's fun.
Uh, I don't know if I'd say fun. It's
They're so entertaining. She's not always trying to make you laugh.
yes, but there's also the other side of that
No,
too.
we don't talk about that. Yeah.
We are live, so yeah, we that's a behind closed door conversation.
Mm-hmm. The internet is forever, Colin.
um, yeah, we had some other questions here. We've got one. What does I, S, and C stand for? Yeah, so we're oh, here we go. The disc to social styles. Lots of organizations are not familiar with the terminology. The disc to social styles. Okay, well, it's more of a
I did.
statement there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, we got a question here from Regit. How do you negotiate using disc? So,
Mm.
how would you negotiate using disc?
Um,
Maybe break down two different types. Like, okay, if we're negotiating with a D type, if we're negotiating with an S type, what are some differences there?
yeah. You know, and I don't want to make it too complicated, but it depends on what are we negotiating? Are we negotiating terms? Are we negotiating prices? So we'll keep it broad, but there are some nuances to that. Um, Negotiating with a D, Ds respond to confidence and authority. I think the thing that most people get wrong about Ds is that you have to kowtow to them, because they are so strong and direct that if you push back on them, that you'll lose the deal. Not in any way true whatsoever. They actually respect people who push back on them. So planting your feet, and deciding where the buck is going to stop and not moving off of that in a pleasant and polite way. Please don't be rude to anyone ever, any of the quadrants. That's fine. Collaborating with an I is going to be your biggest mode for negotiation. It's like, okay, well, let's lock arms together and determine what this is going to look like. S's are typically trying to negotiate because there's some risk that they're attempting to avoid that they're not telling you about. So I always will stop in that moment and say, before we proceed through that and before we have that conversation, can you help me understand what risk you are attempting to avoid through this negotiation so that I know that I'm totally clear? Because
Mm,
it's not going to matter if I don't know what that is. I might negotiate the wrong thing.
yeah.
Um,
And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, right? With the S type is key important pieces. Don't rush them, right? Don't
Yes.
be too pushy. Um,
Yes.
you might have to dig a little bit deeper, like to
Yep.
really find out what's holding them back from moving forward, but not in a pushy way. And then I love that you thought it was needed to bring up "don't be rude." I thought that was kind of funny, but
Well, I'm just talking to
sometimes you got
B
to state the
specifically.
obvious.
Yeah, I'm only talking to the dominant people on this call. No, just kidding. And C's, C's will be very, very, it's seemingly impossible to negotiate with. They're going to show up because they're so researched and ready. So the biggest component of negotiating with a C is know your stuff and preemptively try to understand what questions they're going to have for you and be locked and loaded with anything and everything possible from an information standpoint.
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks for breaking that down. So let's get a little bit deeper into the weeds in the S type, right? So don't rush them. Slower pace is recommended. Don't be pushy. Um, what is a cue that you could pick up on an S type to know, early on, that they're heavily in that quadrant, and how you could sort of tailor your messaging and your sales process to be a better fit with an S type?
Yes. S is on the call. Please don't get upset with me. But it is the non-committal language. I would call it wishy-washy language, but that seems a little bit offensive. But the maybes, coulds, shoulds, possiblies are a pretty good indicator. Again, they're very laid back. They're also just really, really nice. Oh, I mean, hopefully everyone you're speaking to is really nice, but this person is exceptionally nice and is going to put the focus on you, which is actually somewhat of a trap for salespeople to fall into if they're not careful. Because if you are not an S type that's going to throw that right back to your prospect, you may end up talking way too much about yourself and not talking enough about them or asking them enough questions. So that would be a way to pick up on it really quickly. And then also, I don't know that we've ever talked about what methodology you follow from a sales standpoint, Colin. I'm sure it's a myriad of a few. But if you're delivering some expectations on the outcomes of that conversation, I believe in telling people up top that they can say no to you and that you're going to honor that. I have seen physically an S's shoulders drop when you say that, because they don't like saying no. They don't like conflict. They don't like thinking at the end that they're going to have to disappoint you or let you down. So you can watch them like settle into and relax a little bit when you say that. So that's another subtle way to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you bring up, because every seller has been in a deal where they're like, please just tell me no so I can move on.
Yes.
Right?
And an S is the hardest one to get out of them, to say no. They don't want to hurt your feelings. So reiterating that again, like, no, really, I really mean it. I know that salespeople say that, but I really want you to feel comfortable being honest with me. Can we get there? And checking in with them to make sure they feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, Great point for an S. Is there a situation where you shouldn't say that with a particular type?
I personally don't think so. We've never fought on anything before. Maybe this will be the first time that we do. But no, I think, it gives the D a sense of control. It gives an I sense of structure on here's what we're going to talk about. Here are the potential outcomes so that they can stay on track, because we tend to chase shiny objects a little bit and get
Hmm.
distracted. And S is given permission to say no and lowering that threshold of conflict potential. And a C I've given some expectations at the top and literally watched C's write down what I have said, and then they will hold me accountable to the structure and the process that I gave them at the top. So I have not experienced that being a negative with any style.
Yeah. You've been itching to pick a fight with me.
I
I
keep
just know it.
trying.
Unfortunately, I mean, there's still plenty of time left, but I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I think how you deliver it matters a lot.
Yes.
And I think that, the reason that I asked that question was because I was hoping that you were going to say that, number one. You were hoping it was going to end in a fight, which maybe there's still plenty of time. But
True dominant
um,
nature. I'm here to pick a fight with you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, we still got plenty of time to make it happen, and it's live,
Okay.
so it should be interesting. But the reason that I brought that up is because I wanted to kind of touch on, hey, there is some things that are like universal, right? Like, we're breaking this all down, and then, like I said, we're going to get to the point where we're actually going to rewrite an email based on different types, but the reason I brought that up is because, I didn't want people that are tuning in to feel like, oh my gosh, I got to be different in every situation, change everything for every person because it can feel overwhelming. And
Mhm.
that's not the case here. There is some universal things, that can be effective with all types.
Yeah, it's really just language that you're changing, maybe pace, maybe tone. But yeah, permission to say no, being honest, having the prospect's best interest at heart over your own deal size or pipeline. I mean, those things will always hold true.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the C type. Now, with the C
Mhm.
type, something that I think is extremely important is don't be vague, right? Be very detailed with your approach, how you explain things, and really showcase that your, expertise over your salesmanship are some key things for a C type. But what are some additional things that you would add to a C type, and how would you communicate with a C type versus some of the other types that we've already talked about?
Yeah, so the reason that we don't want to be vague with a C type, yes, they do love details, and yes, they are incredibly analytical, and you can't be obsessed with details and analytical over vagueness. However, they're also the most naturally skeptical group. So if you are being vague, they, similar to the Div, but for different reasons, think that you are hiding something or you don't know something, which is even worse, maybe, than hiding something to a C,
Yeah.
which is why that expertise over salesmanship is very important to them. Because the moment that it starts to feel salesy with a C, their skepticism goes up even further.
Mm. Now here's a question that I have for you that I'm just kind of thinking about here that I think a lot of folks would appreciate. Is there any particular type that you feel is harder to sell to, or is it more dependent on what your own type is?
I have a sneaking suspicion that we'll agree on this one too, but
All
I
right.
think it's based upon your own type that is the hardest to sell to. I will say that for a couple of reasons, each of them can be challenging if you're not trained in the skill set of adapting, and C's being that they are they can be challenging to connect with because they are not interested in an emotional aspect of a conversation or how you feel about things. They're very fact oriented, excuse me, black and white. There is no gray. They're also the least demonstrative. So they're really hard to read. They don't make
Mm,
facial expressions as much as the rest of the quadrants. So you as a salesperson may think like, oh my gosh, have I offended them? Are they totally bored? Are they checked out? And they could just be processing. So that can be a little challenging for that reason. Should I take out my headphones and try my speaker on my laptop? Are there audio problems?
I think Aru maybe can let us know if there's any issues. I
Okay.
think it might be okay. There was some comments there mentioning some stuff, but
Okay.
was just curious.
And
So,
then
all right, yeah, go
okay.
ahead.
And S's, sometimes I hear that folks feel S's are the most challenging to sell to because they are hard to read in the way that they don't necessarily want to tell you that they don't like something or something that isn't working for them. But again, both of those can be compensated for if you have the skill set to know how to deal with that and how to communicate effectively.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and if and the interesting thing here is, right. you're a DI type, right? So,
Yes.
so, so you kind of default to the S and C being a
SE,
little
yes.
bit more challenging, right? Which is kind of more to the point. But I think that the main point there is it's a little bit harder to pick up on cues.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think that sounds a lot better.
All right, great. Yeah, and D's and I's have their challenges too. Definitely, if from an SC perspective, if it feels like conflict to talk with someone who is very direct and a little demanding, right, and you get flustered by that, that can surely be a challenge. And if you are on the SC spectrum and an I is going on and on and on about how they feel in their experiences and excitement and puppies and flowers and whatever else they may be talking about, it can feel very hard to wrangle the conversation back to the point. So yes, I did not mean to just pick on the last two we talked about.
And that can be very challenging, right? Because you, to a certain extent, yes, you need to reel it back, but you also need to let them be themselves and feel comfortable. So that can be something that can also be a little bit challenging to navigate. All right, so with the C type, so we've basically broken down all of these types. Anything that you would add here before we move on, and then maybe we can open it up for a few more questions before we move forward.
I think we've covered most of it. C type can be the one thing that I'll maybe we can come back to when we are continue, but can be challenging because C's want a ton of information. And while they do prefer a ton of information, they're also the most known for becoming stuck in analysis paralysis. So if we're giving them so much information that it's actually making their decision harder for them, we do need to be able to know when to step in. So making sure that we're asking clarifying questions when the information is requested, like, yes, I am happy to share that with you. Tell me what you're trying to figure out so that I can ensure that I'm sending you the correct information, and opening that back up to discussion. Still sending it. I don't want you to resist entirely, but I do want you to have the full understanding of what's really going on and talk that through with the C. Otherwise, they'll be left to trying to figure it out on their own with only what you've given them.
Yeah. So as much as they like detail, make sure you're giving them detail about the right things that matter most to them.
Yes.
Yes. All right. So kind of just general question here. Like, how can sellers start implementing DISC specifically into, their messaging? What are some ways to get started if they're like, wow, they've never heard about this the first time, or maybe they have and have really never, actually put it into application? Where's a good place for them to get started?
Everywhere. I think, for me, but now, so this is going to go back to my style, right? So my preference in starting would be in direct communication, but an SC's preference in starting would be in written communication. So it does go back to what their own style is. That's where you should start implementing it, because that's where you're most comfortable. And we haven't gone over, I don't know if we will, so I'll just bring it up now, but one of the easiest places to start in messaging with DISC, regardless of what medium you're in, is really knowing what each quadrant's greatest fear is, what they want to avoid the most. Because whether you're crafting your solution around avoiding the thing that they want to alleviate from their lives, or if it's purely in the meeting that we're focusing on those things. So the easiest part is making sure we're definitely not pinging the things that they hate the most. So D's being failure, loss of control, being taken advantage of. Those would be the top three for a D. And I say that in three different ways, because to an S or a C, those may all be the same thing from their perspective, and to a D, they're actually different. I's greatest fear is rejection, not being heard, not being understood. S's greatest fear, conflict, chaos, letting others down. and a C's greatest fear is being wrong and being criticized. So I think having that information is the easiest place to start thinking in the mode of what should I be covering and what should I be avoiding in my communication with these quadrants.
Yeah, and I think that, something that I'll just kind of sort of double tap on that you said there is knowing yourself, right? Knowing yourself is kind of the first step of, like, maybe you've heard some things that we've been talking about today and you're like, oh my gosh, that is me to a T. Or maybe you're not sure, right? And nobody is like all just one type, right? You're going to have different percentages or scores or how, in each quadrant. So knowing yourself is sort of the first place to start. And then, there's this whole, thought around compatibility, right? Like, you're going to obviously thrive better with people that are similar to yourself, because it's going to be easy to just be yourself and, sort of communicate with them and, run your sales process the way that you would like it ran if you were on the other side of the table. But knowing yourself, and then, like you said, knowing the things for each type that are just traps to avoid, because that's the big thing, right? Is knowing what not to do is, I think, even more powerful than knowing, like, what you should do, because there's certain things that'll just can totally kill your deal if you aren't aware of what the traps are with those types.
Yeah, and I like what you said about it being easier to start with folks who are hardwired like you. And sometimes I get a little bit of concern from those that I train, like, well, will I ever be able to interact with someone who is completely differently wired than I am, or be in a role where the perception is some style is going to be better at this role than another. Sales specifically, I think that the assumption is that D's and I's, because we talk a lot and are extroverted, must be great at sales. Doesn't have anything to do with actual sales skill sets. That's a different show. It's a different rant. But it may take you more effort and energy. That's it. It's not that it's impossible or you'll never figure it out. It's just that you will have to walk into a conversation with intention and exert more energy than maybe you would have to naturally. When you and I hopped on and you were telling me about talking to an S and needing to sort of pull up some reserve within you. It's not that it's challenging. It's not math or whatever's challenging for other people. It just requires energy.
Yeah. And I mean, going outside of your natural tendencies is going to, exert a little bit more energy than just kind of showing up the way that you would want people to show up. So, this is not to be like overwhelming, right? It's just to know how to better communicate, how to better craft messaging, how to, communicate verbally, whether it's in person or virtually, with these different types of people to be more effective. And it's not like you're necessarily changing, it's just how you frame things up in a way that's going to resonate more with them, or isn't going to push them into sort of this zone of resistance because, they think you're trying to deceive them, or they think that, this is not for them because of you maybe not knowing what those traps are.
Exactly.
All right. So now we get to the fun part. This is where we're going to pull up an email, and we're going to let you, Emily, choose a type. So we're going to pull up this email. I got this email off of Good Sales Emails. It's a resource, and we're going to pull it up here, and we're going to rewrite it. Okay. So this is actually cold email that Pavilion sends with courtesy of goodsalesemails.com. And we're going to sort of rewrite this. Let me make it a little bit bigger because it might be hard to see. We're going to rewrite this. So what type are you going to pick?
I feel like we should rock, paper, scissors, because I already got called out for showcasing the dominant style too much. I don't want to play any favorites. Yeah. Maybe we should ask.
Let's ask the audience.
Yeah.
Let's ask the audience. Maybe somebody can hit us in the chat. And, maybe there's a type that you want to know how we would write this to you if you know your type, or maybe there's a type that you struggle with and you're like, I'd really love to know how I could rewrite this to that particular type. So we're going to rely on the audience, because Emily and I will probably choose a D type, and we've already
which would be easy because we just take most of this out, right? Just have a couple bullet points. Yeah.
All right. So we need somebody to chime in, or anybody chiming in with the type that they want. If not, we're gonna pick D type. All right, C type. We got somebody who jumped in here. All right, so Emily, I'm gonna get my keyboard ready, and
we're gonna. Together, it's just me. Okay. All right. Let me read this email. I haven't read it yet, guys.
So hey, saw that company has seen over some personalization growth in the last year. With the economic turbulence going into the market right now, I'm curious to know how your team is overcoming that. Most leaders in similar roles I've connected with mention two primary obstacles amongst growth. So let's start with the first part there, and then we can work our way down. How do you think this would resonate with a C type?
Not perfectly so far.
All right.
So. All right. In a general sense, and you can choose the wording, but in a general sense, I would start with an assumption that they already had it all figured out, right? So I want to play into the fact that C's are very prepared. They're not going to be making mistakes. They've thought things well, not just well in advance, but very thoroughly through.
So you would probably kill this here.
I hate that. Yes.
So you would strike that, and this isn't terrible, but we're just trying to change the things that we would know would be a trap for those particular things that we want to avoid, right?
Yeah, so instead of, right? And then maybe it's like, I'm sure you've prepared for this, right? Yeah.
I'm sure this is something you've thought about, or I'm sure that this is something you've I'm sure this is something you're prepared for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then it goes into most leaders in similar roles I've connected with mention. Okay, so how do you feel about this line for a C type?
We got to take out most and maybe some, right? Because the C is going to see most and be like, bullshit. Don't try to trick me and put me in the most camp. So we got to think about that skepticism.
So we're going to go like this. Get rid of that. Mm-hmm. Most leaders in similar roles I've connected with mention. Okay, so most, we're going to get rid of this and similar.
Yeah.
All right. So something more, how would you reframe that then?
Some leaders I've been speaking with recently.
Yeah. Oops.
To be careful with all or nothing language with C's.
Okay.
To type in front of people. Mentioned two primary obstacles. That's fine.
Okay, so we can keep that. We just want to get rid of that.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel about listing these in this way?
Yeah, C is like a checklist, so I'm okay with a list of a couple of things that aren't in paragraph form.
List, bullet points. What are you thinking?
I mean, it says two primary, so we should leave 1 and 2 because the C is going to see bullet points, and that's going to be incongruent. So I don't like that.
Yeah, yep. and let's. I'm curious to get your thoughts on specifically saying two rather than saying like something more general, right? So
they're very formal.
Here are some ways, right? Would that work well with the C type?
I think 2 is actually a good play here because they are very formal, and we didn't talk about the greeting, but we have to change it from hey to hello, and possibly with Mr. or Mrs. last name to be really, really safe because they're quite formal in how they interact with initial conversation.
Yeah, we skipped that part. So hello is recommended there. What about the subject line?
It's pretty boring, but you know, it is what it's about. So they don't need a ton of flair. But maybe we should leave the subject line for the end once we get through our
The email.
whole.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting way to think about it, right? Is because I think a lot of people start with the subject line first, and to actually to actually write the email first and then go back to the subject line. Super smart.
Yes, highly recommend.
Okay. All right. So some leaders I've been speaking with recently mentioned two primary obstacles amongst growth. Let's see how these are listed out here. Ensuring they successfully develop and train current reps while simultaneously onboarding new reps. How do you feel with that language?
I don't see anything drastically wrong with it. Do you have something you would change?
Ensuring they successfully develop and train current reps while simultaneously. I don't know that I love.
We keep saying reps over and over again.
Yeah. Or that it's sort of listing two things in one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't love that.
Yeah. So first of all, we should also mention anything you write in an email, if you don't have Grammarly, get it, because it's going to matter to see, very much so. So there may be a better way to say that, ensuring they successfully develop, train, and onboard new and existing reps is probably a better way to say that, because it's a little clunky the way it's written now. But I would double check anything I say in Grammarly to ensure that it's grammatically correct.
Now, are you saying that in general or even more specifically with the C type?
Specifically with C types.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, right?
Yep.
And again, because very formal people, right? So a grammar, issue, a grammar mistake, which is easily to do. I'm a victim of that way more often than I would like to admit. It's going to drive a C type crazy.
That's all they can see. So they find like mistakes jump out at them like flashing neon signs.
How could I ever trust this salesperson if they can't even write an email right?
What are you even trying to say? No one can tell with that misplaced comma. Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So we don't hate this, but there's probably a better way to say it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go to the next one. Keeping reps again.
There's a lot of reps. I'm just saying. I think we got to change it.
I mean, keeping. I feel like there's a better way to say that than reps, but
people, their sales teams. I mean,
yeah, your sales team. Yeah, I like that language better. Sales team, up to speed on market changes and sales training, comma, rather than just extensive product training. I don't like this one.
Yeah. Like the point they're trying to make, but I don't know about the way that it's written, specifically because we already mentioned training in number 1. So again, a C is going to see this as
you're saying the same thing twice.
Yes. So why, right? Are we saying it this way? I'm okay with keeping the sales team up to speed on market changes, in addition to extensive product training, because a C is going to find extensive product training very important because it is factual information. So we don't want to diminish it as just extensive product training.
Okay. Say that one more time.
Keeping the sales team up to speed on market changes in addition to extensive product training.
Yeah. They're going to think product training is important.
They are.
And extensive? You keeping it?
They're not going to see anything wrong with it. So I know it pains us. But
I know. See, that's the hard part, right? Because you have to remove your own bias from the equation, right? Because I'm just thinking of myself, oh my gosh, if somebody said extensive product training in an email, I would immediately delete it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. I would too. Yeah.
But how you feel about and most people I think are writing emails in a way that's going to resonate most with them. They're thinking about, if I receive this, how would I feel about it?
Mhm.
And they're not thinking about how would the person that I'm sending it to feel about it. And let's give them a little bit of credit. If they're thinking about it, maybe a little bit, they're thinking about how would the persona that I'm sending this email to feel about it. But that's just not enough.
No.
It's more about the person that's receiving it than the persona. And so, as much as it might pain you to write some things that would drive you nuts if you received, that's how you can really master the art of messaging that's going to resonate with the person that you're sending it to.
Couldn't agree more. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So,
yeah. And if you are sending a message to someone who is opposite you on DISC and it is not uncomfortable for you to write the email, that's probably a sign that you're not doing it effectively. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great red flag that you should pay attention for.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, moving on here.
Like this.
Huh?
Is there an instance that resonates with you more is salesy and gamey, and we can't do that. So
just get rid of it.
Yeah. And right, happy to be a resource if any of this resonated with you. That's okay, right? We can include it, but yeah, I agree. There's no harm in eliminating it.
Okay. I feel like you wanted to rewrite that. My thought was just get rid of it. But you think more of a rewrite of this statement or kill
we
it?
can get rid of it for now, but if you see down below where it says worth exploring ? We'll change that to if that resonates with you, or if you think that would be a productive use of your time, is a better way to say that to a C.
Okay. So we're going to get rid of that. And whoops. Okay. So how do you feel about this? Happy to be a resource if you're looking to further the development of your go-to-market team. Now we're talking about reps and go-to-market team.
No.
You want to stay consistent here.
Yes.
Sorry, Pavilion. We're not trying to pick on you.
Maybe we should.
So happy to be a resource if you're looking to further the development of your sales team.
Yeah. And I don't know that you need exceed quota, increase pipeline, and optimize revenue, because they're going to say bullshit to that. So.
Yeah, it's too salesy.
Yep.
And then obviously we're going to rewrite this worth exploring.
Yes.
In a more direct way. So what would you say here instead? Closing statement.
I would say, please let me know if you think the conversation on the matter would be a productive use of your time.
All right. Why did you say please?
Oh, well, we have to be super formal. We can't just be bossing them around and telling them what to do. As much as I would love to, I can't do it.
Please let me know if having a conversation very specific about the above is worthwhile.
I would say would be a productive use of your time.
Okay. Now we have rewritten the email. Let's revisit the subject line.
Yeah, because that's not even what this is about.
Well, to be fair, we've changed it.
Well, it needed to be changed. I don't think it was ever about optimizing GTM. Yeah, I mean, They're very factual people. It's everything in my heart and soul wants it to be a pattern interrupt and weird, but I don't think it would work. So
like a one-line subject wouldn't be good for a C-type?
yeah, and or irrelevant or goofy. So it needs to have some detail in it and some benefit to them still.
So you got to actually scale back the creativity a little bit.
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we need to have something in there about development, training, sales team. We mentioned the upcoming recession lightly in the beginning. So maybe this is a place where we grab an attention with that fact that we're including. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to pain me to write a lengthy subject.
I'm going to make you do it. I'm sweating from having done the rest of it.
Yeah. So let's look at the context of, so saw company has, okay. So we're talking about that they're, obviously we're assuming that they're growing. And with the economic turbulence, market down, is there something that you're prepared for?
Maybe it's something like additional training for sales teams in preparation for.
We're already prepared. Don't want to
but in preparation for economic downturn. So it's the training that's going to help the team, not the high C has got it figured out and under control, but the team doesn't. Those are the ones that need help.
Or your sales team. And okay, I would. All right. Yeah.
We're at 2:01.
Okay.
We need to ask questions, or if anyone has questions.
All right. So there we go. We rewrote this for a C-type. Thank you, everyone. Emily, as painful as it was to write an email for a C-type, you definitely nailed it. So we're going to open it up. I know we're a little bit over time. So Emily, do you have a few minutes to maybe open it up for any questions?
Sure.
Okay, awesome. Thank you everybody who has joined us and been hanging out with us throughout the session. Hope that you found value in this. Emily is clearly an expert on this stuff, which is why we brought her on today. So we have some time to get some questions answered and just drop them in the chat. Okay, how does this compare to the Myers-Briggs types? Great question, Emily.
Yeah. Myers-Briggs is more personality. So it's how you take in the world, how you perceive the world, how you feel about yourself and belonging in the world. And DISC is really just your behavioral preferences, how you go about things, if you think about it that way. It's not a total reflection of your personality and how you intrinsically break the world down, but more about your, like I said, preferences and habits on the how. It's a good question.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you. Marissa says, I'm negotiating with 2 I-types. What should I do to close the gap on price with an I-type? Great question.
Yeah, I want to ask so many more questions about how we got here to give you the best answer I can. Yeah. Because of course I'm going to say it depends. I would say that 2 I-types would well receive, hey, this has been a great time working with you. I'm confident that we can collaboratively come up with something together. I want to make sure that both of us are able to be heard, and I fully understand where you're coming from. Could we lock arms together and figure this thing out in the trenches with one another?
There's so many magic words that you used there. Yes. Collaboratively, locking arms, want to make sure you're heard. So many magic words you used in that, breaking that down specifically for an I-type. So Thank you for that. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for the question, Ramesh. Any other questions? Drop them in the chat, or we'll bring them up here and we'll try to get them answered. And if we don't have any more, then we will wrap things up. And we will thank Emily for helping us out with an awesome session today. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate it. If people wanted to connect with you, learn more about what it is that you do, where's the best place to connect with you, Emily?
Yeah, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. Emily Shaw, that's pretty easy. And then my email is pretty easy as well. It's emily@lushin.com. That's LUSHIN.com.
Awesome. Thank you to everybody who joined us. Really appreciate it. If you're curious about this stuff, want to learn more, you can go over to humantic.ai. You can try out our tool that we have for you to help make selling to these different types a lot easier. You can run 50 profiles for free. Go ahead and just go to humantic.ai and check it out.
Thanks, Colin.